London, 1825. Emma Mandeville, Duchess of Avebury, stood before the bedroom window, watching the snow settle over the hushed gardens. At 24, she was expected to glow. Instead, she carried a quiet weight, a fear growing slowly inside her, the way winter crept around the house inescapable. Her hand came to rest on the faint curve hidden beneath her wool dress. 6 months. 6 months carrying a new life. 6 months since her world, and Damien's, had begun to crumble and rebuild all at once. The breath she drew in felt unexpectedly light, and she almost smiled. Fragile, they whispered. Incapable, they claimed. Yet here she stood, alive, steady, unyielding, and, paradoxically, afraid. Not for herself, for him. She turned. Damien lay against the pillows, one arm draped across his eyes, his body tense even in rest. It wasn't distance, only vigilance. Over the past months, Emma had noticed a subtle but profound shift, the way his gaze faltered before settling on her belly, as if every movement of the child stirred both wonder and dread within him. The nights he stayed awake, believing she didn't see, the extra hours in the library, not to escape her, but because he simply didn't know where to store a fear that grew faster than his courage. He wasn't pulling away, but he didn't yet know how to draw close to the future forming there, inevitable, alive, relentless. Emma laid her hand over her belly as the baby shifted, gentle yet insistent. Life where there should be hope, and still fear lingered beside it. A fear she tried not to let spill over, because she knew Damien already carried too much of his own. She drew a long breath. She couldn't fall apart. Not when he needed her, even if he didn't know how to ask. Her fingers touched the cold glass as she whispered, "We're going to survive." But the words faded against the window, fragile, unsure of themselves. Because the truth, the one Emma wouldn't confess even to her reflection, was simple and devastating. She did not fear the death that haunted the Mandeville name. She feared what would become of their love if it reached her first. And as the snow kept falling, Emma understood, with the force of an omen, that before she could save the man she loved, she would have to face the one enemy that truly stood between them, the fear still living inside him. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. Emma Barnett had not been raised to be a duchess. She had been raised to survive. Since the age of 16, when pneumonia nearly stole her breath and her family began treating her as something too delicate for the world, Emma had learned to move like porcelain. Light, quiet, contained. She avoided long dances, crowded ballrooms, damp night air, not because she wished to, but because everyone expected her to. In time, she almost believed the story they told about her. Almost. For Emma carried a strength no one ever noticed, forged in nights when she fought for air, and in mornings that arrived despite everything. A quiet resilience, stubborn, steady, unbreakable. And then she met Damien Mandeville, the Duke of Avebury, the man who didn't dazzle through grandeur but through silence. There was something held tight inside him, a weight behind his deep brown eyes, as though he knew secrets about time no young man should bear. When he asked for her hand, society whispered, he so sought after, she so sheltered. But there was something rare between them, born not out of convenience but out of recognition, the kind of intimacy that grows when two vulnerabilities finally find a place to rest. Damien told Emma about the men in his family who died young, about the vow he had made to himself, never to marry, never to have children, never to give a doomed heart to anyone. And Emma told him about the rules she had followed all her life to keep herself safe. Never push too hard, never face the cold, avoid long travels, and above all, that it might be unwise to ever try for a child. So they made a pact. They would love each other, but they would not put a new life in the path of fears they barely understood. But destiny rarely honors such agreements. 3 months after the wedding, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The shock came with a light so fierce it nearly split her in two. And when she told Damien, she saw something shift in his gaze. Not just fear of his own fate, but terror that she might pay the price. And in that moment, Emma understood. What bound them together was greater than the time that threatened them. And some loves, fragile as they may seem, carry the strength to defy even destiny itself. Chapter 1. A Night That Changed Everything. Emma Barnett never imagined that night would alter the course of her life. Seated in the far corner of the ballroom, she watched the young ladies spin beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers when she felt her mother's watchful gaze settle on her. Lady Barnett approached with that familiar, anxious smile, half affection, half fear. "Are you all right, darling? You're not cold, are you?" she murmured. "We can leave if you prefer," Emma answered with the patient smile she had perfected over the years. "I'm fine, Mama, I promise." But the truth was different. Something inside her tightened, not her body, which was unusually calm that evening, but her spirit, weary of being observed, measured, guarded like porcelain about to crack. At 24, Emma understood what it meant to be deemed too fragile for marriage, for children, for any future that required even a trace of bravery. She offered a polite excuse and crossed the ballroom toward the veranda. The air inside was warm and heavy. December's cold, sharp as glass, felt like a rare relief against her skin. Pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, she breathed deeply. The icy air filled her lungs without pain, without struggle. As always, it happened only when no worried eyes were upon her, when she could, for a single moment, simply be Emma, and not the girl everyone feared might fall. She was lost in her thoughts when a quiet sound made her lift her head. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to intrude." Emma turned, her heart stumbling in her chest. A man stood at the threshold, half hidden by shadow, as if uncertain whether he should step onto the veranda. Damien Mandeville, Duke of Avebury. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair deliberately tousled. His deep brown eyes held a guardedness that felt impossible to decipher. He inclined his head politely. "I admit the ballroom felt stifling to me as well," he said softly, voice low and restrained. "If you don't mind, I'll stay on this side. I wouldn't wish to compromise your reputation or your peace." Emma nodded. Damien remained a few steps away, near enough to share the cold air, far enough that no malicious whispers could arise. For a moment, they simply watched the mist settle over the gardens. Then, without looking directly at her, Damien spoke. "I imagine it isn't easy," he murmured. A pause followed, careful and deliberate, being so watched, as if they expectant fragility. Emma felt her breath catch. No one had ever voiced it, never with such accuracy. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He drew a slow breath, chest lifting almost imperceptibly. "Because I know the weight of expectations I didn't choose," he said at last. "And I know what it feels like when others write your ending before you've had the chance to live it." Something deep within her shifted. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. Two strangers finding, in the same silence, the same hurt. "And what do you do when you feel that way?" Emma asked, her gaze steady on his. This time his hesitation was unmistakable. Vulnerable. "I try to live anyway," he answered softly, "even when it feels small. Even when I don't know how long I have." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was strangely warm. A rare understanding flowed between them, subtle and quiet, warming more than the shawl around her shoulders. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken, not from nerves but from a sudden, gentle relief, as if someone had finally seen her beyond the fragile frame the world had drawn around her. They talked for a few more minutes, about the music muffled by the glass, about the irony of charitable balls, about everything and nothing at once. And when Emma finally returned to the ballroom, she sensed something had shifted inside her, as if a small gear long jammed had finally turned. Damien remained on the veranda a while longer. A gust of wind lifted the corner of Emma's shawl left on the balustrade, and he brushed the fabric with his fingers, just long enough to acknowledge the inexplicable moment that had just unfolded. He hadn't planned to meet her, hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't planned anything for years. Living for him meant merely surviving each day. But Emma Barnett had appeared before him with the quiet force of the inevitable, a presence that stirred questions he no longer dared to ask. As if she had seen in him something he had spent a lifetime hiding, when he left the ball, a troubling certainty followed him, part warning, part calling. He needed to see her again, not because he wished to, but because something within him, something old, tired, and suddenly impossibly alive, recognized Emma Barnett, the way one recognizes the first step of a destiny finally awakening. Chapter 2. Recognition. Damien Mandeville did not fear death alone. He feared repeating a history he had never chosen. Every man in his family, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, had died far too young. Since boyhood, Damien had listened to physicians speculate about some inherited flaw, something in the heart, in the blood. Nothing proven, yet enough to root a quiet certainty inside him. His fate had already been written. With each birthday he didn't celebrate. He counted how close he was to the fatal age, and that fear shaped his entire life. He lived avoiding attachments, avoiding expectations, avoiding love. Not for lack of longing, but for fear of the grief he would leave behind, and of the legacy he dreaded passing on to a future heir. Because for Damien, having a child meant more than building a family. It meant condemning an innocent soul to the same shadow that had followed him since childhood. That was the part of his fear he had never dared confess. So at 20, he decided he would never marry. At 25, he realized he might not avoid it forever. A dukedom demanded continuity. But at 30, even with that old curse hovering over him, Damien found himself wanting something he would never say aloud: companionship. He no longer wished to walk through life, or through that vast, silent house alone. Yes, he would submit to marriage, but only to someone who understood what it meant to live under a looming shadow. Someone who would not ask for promises he could not give. And after that night on the veranda, the first person who came to mind was Emma Barnett. 3 days later, Damien sought her out at Lady Ashmore's charitable tea. He disliked such gatherings, but he knew Emma would attend. He found her standing near a window, speaking kindly to an elderly lady, though her distant gaze revealed something he recognized at once: a quiet unrest, deep and familiar. When the older woman stepped away for more tea, Damien drew a steadying breath, pushing aside his own hesitation. "Miss Barnett," he said, offering a restrained bow. Emma lifted her eyes, and in the heartbeat before she spoke, Damien saw surprise, and something gentler, almost welcoming. "Your Grace," she murmured, a faint blush rising. "I didn't expect you to come." "Neither did I," he replied, allowing himself a small, reserved smile. "But I wish to see you again." Her surprise was immediate, unmistakable, and only then did Damien realize his boldness. "Forgive me," he added quickly, voice lower. "Perhaps I was too abrupt. I only meant that I enjoyed our conversation at the ball, and I wondered if, with your permission, we might continue it." Emma hesitated, then gestured to the chair beside her. "Of course, Your Grace. Please." They sat without hurry. The room around them seemed to fade. The clinking of teacups, the muffled laughter, the elegant shuffle of footsteps, everything settling into the background as a soft quietude formed between them. Damien discovered in her a gentle wit, a thoughtful gaze that noticed what others overlooked, a mind that observed long before it judged. Emma, in turn, saw in him not coldness, but reserve, the instinct of someone who had learned to guard what he felt. So after a comfortable pause, Emma asked, "That night, you said you knew what it was like to live under expectations you never asked for. What did you mean?" Damien felt his chest tighten. His words emerged slowly, heavy with years. "The men in my family don't live long," he said, looking down at his teacup before meeting her eyes again. "My father died at 34, my grandfather at 33, my great-grandfather, younger still. Some call it misfortune, others call it a curse. To me, it has always been a silent countdown." Emma didn't look away. There was no pity, only understanding, deep and uncommon. "That frightens you," she said softly with surety. Damien drew a breath, as though finally allowed to admit something he had carried for decades. "Yes, it frightens me, because I know that if I had a wife and children, I might leave them far too soon. And I couldn't bear the thought of causing that kind of pain to someone I love." The word wasn't a confession, yet it carried the weight of one. Emma lowered her gaze, folding her hands gently in her lap. "I understand," she whispered. "My story isn't the same, but I had pneumonia often as a child. Since then, everyone treats me as if I'll break. They say my body can't endure much, that I shouldn't marry, that I shouldn't have children. And sometimes I start to believe them." Damien leaned in slightly, as though something unseen pulled him closer. "Do you truly believe that?" he asked, voice barely above breath. "Or have you simply grown used to what they say?" Emma inhaled deeply before answering. "I don't know anymore." For a moment, a quiet, intimate pause between two lives shaped by different fears. Something aligned. Not romance, not yet. Recognition. Affinity. The sense of being understood in a language spoken only by those who know what it costs to keep going. Damien extended his hand across the table, not far enough to touch her, just enough that she would sense the invitation. "Perhaps," he murmured, "we can discover together what is fear and what is truth." Emma's eyes drifted from his hand to his face. Something within her opened, hope, fragile but steady, like a narrow crack allowing light to pass. She nodded. It wasn't love. It was merely a delicate nearness, the quiet beginning of something neither of them dared to name. When Damien left the gathering that afternoon, he felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. For the first time, the shadow at his back seemed less dense. And as the carriage moved through the London streets, one image lingered before him. Emma, not as frailty, but as possibility. The first in a very long time, and he found he liked that. Chapter 3. The Decision. Emma couldn't push Damien from her thoughts that night, nor in the nights that followed. Ever since Lady Ashmore's charitable tea, where they had spoken with more openness than two near strangers should dare, something within her had stirred awake. She remembered the way he had chosen the seat beside her, the careful weight behind each of his words, the exact moment he revealed the shadow that had followed him since childhood. And above all, she remembered how that unexpected, intimate exchange had opened a quiet space inside her, a space where, for the first time, she wasn't treated as something too delicate to touch. In the days that followed, they crossed paths briefly at other gatherings, polite greetings, short conversations in the presence of others, glances that lingered longer than propriety allowed. Nothing that could be called a meeting, yet everything needed to deepen what had begun on the veranda and taken root at Lady Ashmore's tea. Until, weeks later, they met again, this time not in a crowded ballroom, but in a smaller, calmer sitting room of the same residence, open to more intimate visits after the main event. There, far from the noise, Emma felt her heart quicken as she watched Damien cross the room toward her. Something in his eyes had changed, a resolve that hadn't been there before, as though everything they had said and all they had not dared say had finally found the right moment to surface. "Miss Barnett," he said, bowing with precise courtesy, "would you grant me a few minutes of your company?" She nodded before she even realized she had done so. Damien led her to a small sofa near the window. They sat. The silence between them held a different weight, not the hesitancy of first meetings, but of two people standing at the edge of a threshold. Before speaking, Damien gestured subtly to a footman waiting by the door. The servant approached and placed in the Duke's hands a small box of polished lightwood, simple but carefully kept. "There is something of yours that belongs back with you," Damien said, holding the box for a moment, as though returning something far too precious. Emma frowned softly, intrigued, until he lifted the lid. Her thick shawl lay inside, perfectly folded. "My shawl!" she exclaimed, hand rising to her chest. "I thought I had lost it." "You left it on the veranda that night," Damien explained. "I kept it until I found the courage to return it. Emma laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. Mama scolded me the entire way home. She insisted I would fall ill for losing my warmest shawl. One of the maids lent me another, and still she grumbled all the way up the stairs. Damien allowed himself a brief smile, but his eyes held something earnest. I kept it because, I admit, I couldn't forget you, and because in some foolish way, I felt that returning it would close something I wasn't ready to lose. Emma touched the fabric, her heart tightening at the tenderness behind the gesture. I didn't know it had meant so much. He closed the box gently and took her hands, now free of anything except the moment between them. It meant enough to bring me here today, to say something I never imagined I would say. Emma lifted her gaze, caught between surprise and hope. I've thought a great deal about our conversation, he murmured, looking at his own hands as though afraid of revealing too much. What you said, about preferring something real, even if brief, rather than a life guided by fear. Emma's breath tightened. And what have you concluded? He raised his eyes and found in hers the courage he had lacked. I have spent my life trying to protect others from myself, he said, his voice rough with sincerity. My father died when I was 8. My memories of him are made of coughs and silent farewells. I swore as a boy that I would never inflict such pain on someone who loved me. Emma remained quiet. Her gaze felt like shelter. And later, as a man, I convinced myself it was noble to keep my distance. He exhaled slowly. But then I met you, and I realized I had been running, and that running didn't make me a better man, only a lonelier one. Her heart stumbled. She had to breathe before answering. I was protected too, Your Grace, guarded. My family loves me, but they always watched me as though I might break without warning, and for years I believed they understood my body better than I did. And now? Damien asked, his voice touching her like a gentle hand. Emma lifted her face, something new taking form within her. Now I think they may have been wrong, and that I may have been wrong, and that if I don't dare now, I will spend my life haunted by what I never tried. Damien went still. Then, as one stepping toward forbidden ground, he extended his hand, not far enough to touch her, but close enough for her to feel the pull. Miss Barnett, may I ask something that might sound indelicate? You may. He drew a slow, bracing breath. If I were to ask for your hand, and if from the beginning I made it clear that I do not wish for heirs, would you consider such a union? The last word barely emerged. It wasn't a proposal, it was a confession. Emma lowered her eyes. I always dreamed of children, she whispered, honest and vulnerable. But I spent so many years hearing that my body couldn't bear it, that I began to fear something I never even tried. Then she raised her gaze again. There was light in it now. If that is what terrifies you, then we will live without heirs. We can build something that belongs only to us. Damien closed his eyes, as if her answer hurt and healed all at once. When he opened them, his expression was both resolute and exposed. Then I will ask for your hand, Miss Barnett, formally, and if you accept, and I will walk beside you for whatever time we are given. Emma couldn't stop the tremble of tears. Yes, she breathed. Yes. He took her hand. The thin glove softened the touch, but not the warmth nor the meaning. It felt like a vow. 2 weeks later, Damien asked for her hand. There were protests, tears, warnings, but Emma stood firm. They married at Avebury Hall in a small, serene ceremony. When she said yes, Emma felt for the first time that she was living, not merely surviving. In the months that followed, they honored their pact. The future was a topic they approached with distance, children with silence. But what grew between them, care, gentleness, attentiveness, deepened each day. They consummated the marriage with the same tenderness that had drawn them together from the start, taking precautions, respecting limits, discovering one another slowly. And without noticing, something steady and unexpectedly beautiful began to form between them, something that made the world feel less heavy, at least for a time. Until, 3 months after the wedding, small signs began to appear: fatigue, nausea, quiet delays. When the physician confirmed the pregnancy, The ground fell away. And the thought that struck Emma was cruel in its simplicity. Damien would not survive this news, not because he feared death, but because of what this meant for both of them. Chapter 4. The Broken Pact. Damien was standing in the portrait gallery when Emma finally found him. Once merely solemn, that corridor had become, in the past days, a silent prison. He lingered there for hours, unmoving, studying the faces of the men who came before him. His father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, all far too young, all with eyes too grave, all seeming to whisper the same sentence. "Prepare yourself. You are next." Emma paused at the entrance. Pale morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Damien's figure, framed against the row of portraits, looked as though he already belonged among them, like life was simply waiting for the moment to place him in that gilded frame. She hesitated, but 3 days had passed since the physician's visit, 3 days carrying a storm beneath her ribs. She couldn't wait any longer. Damien. He turned at once. Exhaustion marked his eyes as clearly as the shadows beneath them. Emma knew he had barely slept. She had heard his footsteps pacing through the night. "Emma," he said, taking a step toward her. The tenderness was still there, but buried beneath a worry that never left him. "You shouldn't be up. Are you unwell? I need to speak with you." She closed the door just enough to ensure privacy without inviting scandal. "It's important." Damien's brow tightened as he moved closer. "Are you ill? Should I fetch the doctor?" "No." She clasped her hands together, trying to steady their trembling. "I already consulted him." She drew a deep breath. "Damien, I'm pregnant." Silence fell over the gallery like heavy, sudden snow. Damien went white. His eyes lost focus, as though the floor had opened beneath him. He stepped back, searching for air, and not finding it. "Forgive me." "Say that again." "I'm pregnant," Emma repeated, softer now, but steadier. The doctor confirmed it. He turned partly away as if the light from the window burned. One hand raked through his hair, a gesture of a man trying to contain something breaking loose inside him. "This shouldn't be possible," he murmured. "We were careful. We did everything right." "I know. But even so, it happened." Damien closed his eyes, as though the world had grown too narrow. "No, Emma, we had a pact." "I haven't forgotten," she said, the ache rising in her throat. "And you think I wanted to break it? I thought of us every day, every precaution, every limit. I feared this too, Damien, perhaps more than I dare admit." He faced her, too quickly, and the pain in his expression turned to desperation. "And now, what do you expect me to do? Accept it? Face something I was never prepared for? Pretend this fear doesn't exist?" The words struck her, but she didn't move. "What I expect," she said, steadying her voice, "is that you don't make me face this alone. That you don't retreat from me as if I betrayed you." Damien froze. That quiet accusation, spoken with such gentleness, wounded him more than any anger could. "Withdraw from you," he repeated, a broken whisper. "Emma, never." She stepped toward him. "Then tell me what you intend to do." Her voice trembled, but courage carried it forward. "Will you ignore this child? Will you disappear into your fear until I no longer recognize you? Will you live each day counting how much time you think you have left? That's not it." His voice cracked. "You don't understand. Emma, you don't understand." He turned again, bracing his hands against the wall beside his father's portrait. His shoulders trembled. "I was 8 when Winter took my father," he murmured. "I remember the coughing, the silent goodbye, the emptiness afterward. My mother wept for months, and I spent my life waiting for the same fate." He looked up at the painting. "I grew up knowing I would leave my wife and children the same way, and now there will be a child who may never know me, who will look at these faces and ask who I was." Emma's heart tightened with unbearable force. She moved toward him, slowly, carefully. "Damien," she said, voice shaking but firm, "you've spent all these years preparing to die. And never, not once, have you allowed yourself to consider that you might live." He turned toward her, and for a fleeting second she saw the war inside him, hope battling terror, life battling fate. "And if I don't," he whispered, "if I leave you alone, how will you raise a child without me?" Emma lifted her hands, hesitated only a heartbeat, then touched his face with a tenderness that felt like prayer. "Then I will do what your mother did," she whispered, tears slipping free. "I will live. I will love this child, and I will tell them about the father who didn't run, even when everything in him begged to, about the man brave enough to love me, in spite of it all." Damien closed his eyes, as though her words tore him open. Emma felt him tremble, not with weakness, but like someone split between surrender and courage. At last, he covered her hands with his. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Emma," he confessed. Her heart broke quietly. "Then find out," she said, gently pulling her hands free and stepping back, "because I will have this baby, with you, or without you. And I will pray you choose to be here. But I cannot force you." She turned before he could answer, because she knew there would be no answer yet. Her steps echoed through the gallery, steady despite the storm inside her. She didn't look back. Damien remained among the portraits, his reflection fractured in the gilded frames. His breath ragged, his body bowed beneath a weight far older than he was. Emma climbed the stairs with her heart aflame. She felt sorrow, she felt love, and for the first time she felt anger, not at him, but at the fate that had crushed him since boyhood, shaping him into a man terrified of a destiny that might not even be real. Damien didn't return to their room that night. He stayed in the library, staring into a fire that slowly dimmed. A child was coming, an heir. Exactly what he had sworn never to allow. And as the last flame flickered out, Damien realized something terrible and true. He had spent so long expecting to die. He had forgotten completely how to live, forgotten who he was before Emma. But the fear, the ancient Mandeville fear, was still there, hovering, fierce, relentless. And for the first time he did not know whether he had the strength to face it. Chapter 5. The Hidden Strength. Emma woke alone again. The other half of the bed held only cold, untouched, silent, as though Damien had abandoned it not days ago, but weeks. It wasn't unusual for them to sleep apart, yet there was something different now in his absence. Something chosen. Something that hurt. She laid a hand over the small curve of her belly. "Forgive us, my love," she whispered. "Your father is dueling ghosts he doesn't know how to face." But as the words left her, something inside her shifted back into place, not resignation, but clarity. If Damien couldn't face the terror that ruled him, then someone would have to, and that someone was her, not out of heroism, out of necessity. A life was growing inside her, a life that deserved more than silence and shadows. Emma rose, dressed carefully, and went down for breakfast. Damien was at the table, seated at its head, his plate untouched. He stood when she entered. The dark crescents beneath his eyes told her all she needed to know about his sleepless nights. "Good morning, Emma," he said quietly. "How do you feel?" "Better than I expected." She sipped her tea. "I'll be going to the village this morning. There are a few families I wish to visit." Damien frowned. "Do you not think it wiser to rest?" Emma lifted her gaze, and for a moment Damien seemed to forget how to breathe. "I've spent my whole life being invited to rest," she said calmly, "and it never made me stronger." She stood before he could reply. Emma left the estate accompanied only by her lady's companion and the coachman. She requested the smaller carriage, dismissing any additional attendants. She needed to step outside the fragile glass dome of Avebury Hall. She needed the real world's air. The village pulsed with a humbler kind of life. Barefoot children running across the dirt, women balancing baskets on their hips, men working beneath the open sky. There was hardship here, but there was strength too. A strength Emma had never seen inside gilded walls. She was received by Mrs. Fletcher, a widow with 5 children. "Forgive the disorder, Your Grace," the woman said. "The house never stays quite tidy." "I'm here to talk, not to inspect," Emma answered with a smile. Over tea served in worn cups she listened, about the husband buried too soon, the winters that stretched longer than human endurance, the loneliness of raising children with one pair of hands. "It must have been terrible," Emma murmured. "It was," Mrs. Fletcher replied, simple and true. "But there are strengths we discover only when we have no choice. I still feel fear. Every day. But fear doesn't put food on the table, Your Grace, so I do what must be done. Day after day." The words struck Emma like light through an old pane of glass. The next visits revealed the same truth. Women lived, loved, lost, and continued. Not because they were unbreakable, but because they were needed, and that was enough. When Emma returned to Avebury Hall, she found Damien waiting at the entrance. His shoulders were rigid, his expression tight with worry. "Emma, you were gone so long, I feared that something had happened to me," she asked as she stepped down from the carriage, declining his hand, not out of rudeness, out of honesty. "I told you I was going to the village." "Damien," she said gently, so gently it pained them both, "why do you believe that any effort will break me? Why do you imagine I'm incapable of surviving what countless women survive every day?" He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Emma stepped closer. "Today, I met women who buried husbands, raised children alone, endured winters harsher than any we've known. Women who wake with fear and walk anyway, and I understood something." He waited, raw and exposed. "Weakness doesn't live in the body," she said. "It lives in the way we choose to face life. And I choose to face it. I choose this baby. I choose to live, Damien." His eyes flickered as though struck by an arrow he never saw coming. "If you cannot choose the same," her voice wavered but did not fall, "then I will go on without you if I must." It felt like a door had closed softly between them. Emma walked past him and entered the house, letting the cold air settle in the space she left behind. That night, Damien stayed in the library. The embers in the hearth dimmed slowly, surrendering like soldiers who no longer wished to fight. Her words echoed through him, relentless. "Weakness doesn't live in the body, but in the way we choose to face life." Could it be that he, the man who had prepared all his life to die, was the weaker of the two? Could it be that living required more courage than surrendering to a fate he had accepted without proof? A daring question pressed against the walls of his mind, like the first crack in an ancient fortress. What if I live? And more urgently still, how much longer until Emma stops waiting for me? Chapter 6. Surrender. Damien didn't sleep a moment that night. He sat in the library beside the window, watching darkness dissolve into grey. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider a thought he had always avoided, as though it were flame. What if the curse was nothing more than a story told by frightened men? Perhaps his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had died young because of illnesses poorly understood, because of brutal winters, because of circumstance. Perhaps what he inherited was not a sentence, but the fear he had kept alive for so long. And even if a shadow did linger over the Mandeville line, what life had he lived? Hollow, restrained, a man waiting for the inevitable, a prisoner of an idea. Emma had been right. He had lived as though walking toward an execution, counting years instead of days. And in that grim arithmetic, he had forgotten the simplest, most powerful possibility: living. When the sky began to pale, Damien made his decision. He washed his face, dressed, and walked to the room he had abandoned. He paused at the door and drew a quiet breath. "Come in," Emma called, her voice serene, distant. Damien entered. She sat by the window in her robe, hair loose over her shoulders. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her expression, quickly replaced by dignified hurt. "Damien." He closed the door gently behind him. "May I speak with you?" She hesitated, then motioned to the chair. Even so, he remained standing, as though he needed the ground beneath him to anchor what he was about to say. "I spent the night thinking about what you told me," he began, "and I realized you were right. I've been living like a condemned man, not because of death, but because of my fear of it. I condemned myself to an empty life and dragged you into it with me." Emma listened in silence, the kind of silence that receives truth, that demands it. "And now?" she asked softly. Damien drew in a long breath. Then, in an act as unlikely as it was necessary, he dropped to his knees before her. He, the Duke, he, the man who had always stood rigid. On his knees, not out of despair, but out of surrender. "Now I want to choose differently," he said, voice low but unwavering. "I want to choose you, choose this child, choose to live, even if for a short time, even if it hurts, even if I have no guarantees." He took her hands. "Hurting you was my greatest failure. Leaving you alone with fear. The very thing I vowed never to do. You faced your terror. I hid behind mine." Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You were terrified," she whispered. "I was," he admitted. "But terror doesn't excuse my cowardice. I was meant to be your shelter, yet I became your absence." Tears filled her eyes. "But can I trust that when fear returns, you won't pull away again?" Damien cupped her face with trembling hands. "The fear won't vanish," he said. "Perhaps it never will. But last night I learned I can feel afraid and still act. I stayed in the library when I should have been here. I won't make that choice again." Emma closed her eyes. "I'm so afraid, Damien. Not only of the birth. I'm afraid of losing you. Afraid the shadow is real, that I'll be left alone to tell our child who the father was. Someone they never met." Her words tore something inside him. "I fear that too," he whispered. "I've feared it since I was a boy. But Emma, I'm here now, and that has to matter." His hands slid gently along her cheeks, reverent. "I'd rather spend whatever years I have left living with you than hiding from the life we could have. I don't want to run from you, or from this love. Not anymore." Emma drew him into her arms, a fragile, desperate, forgiving embrace. Damien held her as though she were the only truth left in the world. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "For every night I left you alone. For every silence. For every fear I let speak for me. If you allow it, I'll try every day to be the man I should have been from the beginning." She pulled back just enough to see him. "Just don't leave me," she pleaded. "Don't leave when everything grows dark. Don't leave me to carry this alone." "I won't," he vowed. "I'll stay, and I'll prove it, Emma, until every doubt quiets." Then, with a timid but brave gesture, she guided his hand to her belly. "He's here," she whispered through tears. "Still small but here. And he's yours, he's ours." Damien looked down. For a moment fear rose like an old phantom, but something stronger rose with it: awe, reverence, love. "I will love this child," he murmured, a vow shaped from a lifetime of silence. "I will love him for as long as I live, and even after." Emma smiled through her tears. The fracture inside him, the one he had carried his entire life, did not disappear. But it began to close, slowly. Enough for something new to take its place. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, letting pain soften into something gentler. And when they finally parted, hope lived in her eyes. And for the first time in many years, Damien allowed himself to feel it too. Chapter 7. The Longest Winter. Winter arrived without mercy, and with it, the hardest and, strangely, the brightest months of Emma's life. Damien honored every word he had promised her. In the mornings they shared breakfast in a calm, unspoken peace. At night, he returned to the room that was now truly theirs, as though afraid a single absence might undo everything they had rebuilt. And little by little, Emma began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they could walk this path together. But pregnancy offered her no gentleness. No matter how strong she was, her body demanded its price. There were days when rising from bed felt like a quiet war. Nights when the nausea woke her without warning, and Damien, always awake at the slightest sound, held her hair back and whispered words she couldn't distinguish, but whose warmth steadied her more than any remedy. As her belly grew, so did a different kind of fear. Not the old one planted by her family, but a humbler, more honest dread that her body might falter when it mattered most. It was on a January night that fear finally took shape. Snow lay over Avebury Hall like a heavy blanket, and the silence outside felt frozen in place. Emma woke to a sharp pain slicing through her back, as if something inside her had torn. She shifted. The pain flared again. A small cry escaped before she could stop it. Damien woke instantly. "Emma?" He lit the candle, and the flame revealed how pale she'd become. "What happened?" "I don't know. But it hurts," she whispered, trying to sit up. The pain surged, stealing her breath. "Damien, something is wrong." He didn't ask questions, he ran. Emma was left alone with the sound of the wind tapping against the window, her breath short and her heart pounding. 7 months. Too soon. Cruelly soon. She placed both hands on her tight, trembling belly. "Hold on, my love," and she murmured. "Not yet." When Dr. Harrison arrived half an hour later, the house was awake and in chaos. He examined her with calm, practiced hands, asking, listening, observing. Damien never let go of her hand, gripping it as though he could drain his fear through the touch. At last the doctor straightened. "It is not labor," he said. Emma closed her eyes as a warm ribbon of relief slipped from her lips. "But," he continued, "your body is under great strain. One misstep, and labor could begin far too early. I must insist on complete rest, Lady Avebury." Emma agreed without hesitation. When they were alone, Damien sat beside her, his trembling hands resting atop the blanket. "For a moment," he whispered, voice tight, "I thought I was losing you." Emma took his hand and guided it to her cheek. "I'm here," she said gently, "and I'm stronger than I believed, stronger than anyone believed." He closed his eyes and pulled her into his arms, silent, shaken, almost desperate. And so the longest winter began. The bedroom became Emma's entire world, and Damien became its most constant part. He read to her, poetry when she was tired, novels when she needed escape, estate reports when she insisted on feeling useful. Sometimes they simply sat by the window, watching the snow fall, speaking of childhood, of fear, of the quiet memories that make up a life. One afternoon, with snow piling thick outside, Damien gazed at the white landscape and murmured, "If it's a boy, he'll inherit everything." The title, and the shadow that comes with it. Emma studied his profile. "And if it's a girl?" He turned slowly, as though the question had opened a window inside him. "Then perhaps the past will not repeat itself," he said, offering a frail but genuine smile. Emma smiled back. "Then for our sake, I hope it's a girl." Damien sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "Emma," his voice trembled, then steadied. "If I die tomorrow, I want you to know these months have been the best of my life." Her eyes filled. "Don't say that." "I must," he insisted, touching her cheek. "I regret nothing. Not a single choice." She wrapped her arms around him. "Nor do I." By February, Emma's belly had become a small moon, round, high, unmistakably alive. The baby, stubborn as its father, moved with force, demanding space in the world. Dr. Harrison visited weekly. His words were reassuring, but his eyes carried caution. One quiet night, Emma woke and found Damien deeply asleep, his face softened by the absence of fear. She ran a hand over her belly, and the baby answered with a firm, insistent kick, present, alive, unyielding. For the first time, fear wasn't her first thought. She imagined the first cry, the baby's face, Damien's expression when he held their child, and spring, so distant for so long, suddenly felt possible. She touched Damien's cheek and whispered, "We'll make it. All 3 of us." And when sleep finally returned to her, it brought no shadows. It brought a dream of flowers, of light, of a garden where she walked safely, holding 2 small hands, one on each side. A dream that felt at last like a sign, Chapter 8. The Choice. March arrived like a promise still waiting to be fulfilled. Morning light seemed clearer, yet the cold lingered, persistent, silent, a winter refusing to die. Snow fell less often now, but the spirit of the season hovered stubbornly over Avebury Hall, freezing everything in a prolonged pause. For Emma, every movement required strategy. The 9th month weighed on her like an anchor and a blessing. The baby had dropped, low, so low, and Dr. Harrison warned that it could happen any moment, any day, any night, any breath drawn too deeply. Lady Barnett had arrived 2 weeks before, unable to stay away now that the birth approached. She drifted through the house with a blend of anxiety and devotion, rearranging pillows, checking teas, clasping her daughter's hands whenever she suspected Emma was hiding a pain. Her presence was constant, loving, and at times suffocating, but Emma didn't mind. Not now. There was unexpected comfort in having her mother close, as though a fragment of her former life had finally found its place inside the new one. Damien remained close as well, physically at least. He watched Emma with an almost instinctive vigilance, eyes following every shift in posture, his hand reaching for hers in the middle of the night just to feel her warmth, refusing, stubbornly, to leave the estate even when the duchy demanded his attention. But behind that vigilance was something hollow, a space his presence couldn't quite fill. Emma noticed. She noticed the way his silence stretched longer at dinner, the way his gaze drifted toward some memory only he could see. Damien was there, and yet distant, like a man walking across thin ice, waiting for the crack beneath his feet. She knew the truth. The child was almost here. But Damien still lived as if the worst were inevitable, so she decided to speak. Not out of impatience, but because she could no longer wait for courage to come on its own. That afternoon, descending the stairs felt like climbing a mountain. The weight of the baby pulled her forward, her breath shortened. Each step required careful balance, but her determination, born with the pregnancy itself, carried her downward. She found Damien in the library. The fire glowed warmly, but he seemed untouched by it, bent over documents he wasn't truly reading. His expression was distant, as though he were trying to solve an impossible puzzle etched into his fate. When he heard the door creak, he rose in an instant. "Emma!" His voice filled with alarm. "You shouldn't be out of bed. If you needed something, I would have—" "Damien." Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut gently through his panic. "I need to talk to you." He hurried to her side, helping her sit. His hand brushed hers, cold, despite the blaze in the hearth. When she finally settled, Damien knelt beside her. It was a gesture that had become familiar, and always revealed more than he intended to say. "I'm here," he murmured. "Tell me." Emma drew a slow breath. "You're afraid." He closed his eyes, as though the truth opened an old wound. "I am," he confessed. "Not just of the birth," she continued, "but of everything, of me, of the baby, of yourself. You're living as though the worst has already been written." Damien hesitated, then spoke barely above a whisper. "I imagine every possible outcome, and all of them end badly. It feels as though I'm walking toward a story already decided, as though death is simply waiting for its cue." Emma cupped his face in both palms. "Look at me." He did. "You're saying goodbye to us before it's time," she said softly, "and I cannot bring this baby into the world with a man who has already said farewell in silence." Pain washed through his eyes. "Emma, I don't know how to stop. I've spent 30 years learning to fear the future. I don't know how to unlearn it. But you know how to choose," she replied gently but firmly, "and you need to choose now, before the baby comes. Choose to be here, with us, in the present." He swallowed hard. "And what if I lose you?" he whispered. "If, the moment I finally allow myself to love without restraint, you're taken from me?" Emma touched a finger to his lips. "Loving is always a risk," she said. "But living in fear of pain is dying a little every day. Damien, you taught me to doubt what people said I was. Now I ask you to doubt what they told you would become of you." A deep silence fell between them, not hostile, but heavy with internal battle. Then Damien breathed in like a man rising from deep water. "I choose you," he said at last. "I choose us. For a day, 100 days, 1,000. The number doesn't matter. I want to see our child born. I want to hear them cry. I want to be here when you wake. I want to try, Emma, every single day." Tears slid down her cheeks before she could wipe them. "Then promise." He lifted her hands to his lips. "I promise, with everything I have." Emma embraced him. The baby moved between them, as though recognizing the vow. For the first time, fear seemed to retreat. 3 nights later, the pain began. Not the erratic aches of the earlier months, but something deeper, organized, inexorable. A rising wave that gripped her spine and forced the air from her lungs. Emma bent with a cry. "Damien," was all she managed. He woke instantly. "It's time?" he breathed, already on his feet. She nodded. The room erupted with motion, servants rushing, hot water being fetched, linens changing, instructions echoed through the hall. Dawn. Harrison arrived as the pain tightened into a relentless rhythm. "Your Grace," he said upon seeing Damien beside the bed. "The father usually waits." "I'm staying," Damien interrupted, unwavering. "She won't be alone." Emma lifted her hand. He took it as though it were the last solid thing on earth. Lady Barnett rose when she saw Damien remain inside, defying every rule of etiquette. Her eyes met his for a single moment, a mother's silent plea. "Protect her. Do not let me lose her." Damien bowed his head in solemn vow before shutting the door, and the house held its breath. Hours passed. Lady Barnett stayed in the corridor, listening to the muffled sounds of labor, the doctor's calm instructions, hurried footsteps, Emma's cries. At every sudden silence she clutched her chest. At every new cry she prayed. When a maid hurried by carrying linens, Lady Barnett seized her arm. "Is she too weak?" she whispered, trembling. The maid hesitated, then offered a tender smile. "Your daughter is stronger than she seems, milady, much stronger." Lady Barnett closed her eyes. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. But it wasn't until the first newborn cry, sharp, loud, brilliantly alive, that her legs gave way and she slid into a chair, hands covering her face as she wept. For Emma, for her granddaughter, for the strength she had never believed her daughter possessed. Hours later, when Emma believed her body had nothing left to give, one final push tore through her. And then came the sound that changed everything. A cry, strong, high, alive. The world went still. "It's a girl," Dr. Harrison announced, and for an instant the smile on his face lit the entire room. Emma began to sob. Damien did too. He kissed her forehead, her temples, her hands, gratitude pouring from him in every touch. When the baby was placed in Emma's arms, time folded inward until nothing existed but the tiny, red, perfect face before her. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered. Damien touched his daughter's head with reverent care. "What shall we name her?" she asked. He inhaled, deeply, completely, for the first time. "Victoria," he said, "because she is our victory." Emma smiled through her tears. Victory over fear, over history, over everything. Outside, dawn broke, turning the snow to pale gold. And Damien, holding his daughter for the first time, understood at last. Time had never been his enemy. It was, for the first time, a gift. Chapter 9. Spring Arrives. The first months with Victoria were an entirely new kind of life, exhausting, radiant, and filled with small revelations. Lady Barnett, after witnessing with her own eyes the strength she had always feared her daughter lacked, finally returned home. She didn't leave out of indifference, but out of peace. For the first time she could depart without the weight of worry, certain Emma was exactly where she belonged, safe, loved, and unexpectedly strong. Emma woke at the first whimper of her daughter, cradled her, fed her, whispered lullabies she hadn't even known she remembered. The fatigue ran deep, but it came wrapped in something she had never experienced before: wholeness. She, who had been raised among warnings and limits, discovered that the body everyone deemed fragile held a stubborn resilience. Damien tried to help in every way he could, even when he wasn't sure how. Seeing that man, who once trembled at the thought of fatherhood, hold their daughter as though she were a delicate miracle, was a miracle in itself. But there were silent nights too. Sometimes Emma woke to an empty space beside her. She would find Damien in the portrait gallery, standing before the faces that bore the weight of the Mandeville name. The way he looked at those men always unsettled her. "Damien," she would say softly. He turned slowly. "I'm 33, Emma," he murmured. The age when my grandfather died." Emma never let him finish that thought. She moved closer, took his hand and anchored him. "Let's stay with today," she whispered. "For now, that's enough." He nodded, but she could see it, the daily battle he fought within himself. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It hinted. The first buds appeared shyly in the gardens, and the snow retreated without hurry. One morning, when Emma opened the curtains, she found Avebury Hall revived. New greens, yellow blossoms, sunlight that seemed warmer, more hopeful. She spent long hours in the gardens with Victoria, showing her petals, colours, shifting shadows on the grass. The baby stretched her arms toward everything, dazzled by the vastness of her world. Often Damien joined them. He sat in the grass beside them, forgetting titles, duties, the stiffness of formal attire. He simply watched, Emma, their daughter, the life unfolding before him, with a kind of grateful wonder. One afternoon, with Victoria sleeping in her mother's arms, Emma murmured, "You're different." Damien raised an eyebrow, lying back on the grass. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said with a soft smile, "as if you left something behind." He thought for a moment, staring at the bright blue sky. "Perhaps I did," he said at last. "The fear is still there, but it no longer decides my future. It feels strange to discover I always had a little more time than I believed." Warmth bloomed in Emma's chest. That shift, small but real, was worth every tear she had shed, every difficult conversation, every winter endured. Summer brought heat and an unexpected visitor. The Dowager Duchess of Avebury had written to say she wished to meet her granddaughter. Emma's stomach tightened. She had never met the woman, but had heard enough to imagine her rigid, severe, unyielding. When the carriage finally stopped at the front steps, Emma held Victoria a little closer. Damien stood beside them, tense, as if awaiting judgment. The carriage door opened. The Duchess descended slowly, regal despite the years, her grey hair pinned with immaculate precision. Her eyes, so much like Damien's, rested on Emma, then on the baby. "Your Grace," Emma greeted, offering the proper courtesy. The Duchess didn't answer at once. She studied them, the mother with the child in her arms, the son standing beside them, as if trying to understand something she had missed for years. At last, her expression softened. "May I hold her?" she asked, her tone gentler than Emma expected. Emma placed Victoria in her arms. The Duchess received her with surprising tenderness. For several long seconds she simply gazed at the baby, the alert eyes, the curious little face. A single tear escaped, discreet and fragile. "She is beautiful," she murmured. "So beautiful." Damien stepped forward instinctively. "Mother," she raised a hand, asking for silence. "Damien, you have what your father never had. What many of the men in our family never had." She drew a deep breath. "Do not waste it." He absorbed her words like a quiet blow. When she returned Victoria to her mother, she looked at Emma. "You are stronger than I imagined." Her voice was sincere. "I am grateful for that." Emma felt her eyes sting, but smiled gently. "Thank you, Your Grace." The visit was brief, but enough to shift something deep. When the carriage pulled away, Damien wrapped his arms around Emma from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She was wrong about you," he murmured, "and so was I. If I had believed in all that supposed fragility, I might never have allowed myself to love you like this." Emma touched his hand. "I think neither of us was what they imagined. Maybe We just needed each other to discover who we truly were. That night, after laying Victoria down to sleep, they stepped out onto the veranda. Warm air carried the scent of late blooms. The stars glimmered above them. Emma leaned into Damien's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. "Are you still afraid?" she asked softly. Damien considered before answering, and that pause to Emma was precious. "I am," he admitted. "But fear doesn't govern me anymore. It speaks softly now. Very softly. I too have made life louder than the fear." Emma smiled, closing her eyes. They were not free of shadows, but for the first time they had enough light to cross through them. Spring had finally come, but what blossomed between them was larger than any season. And as Emma looked toward the future, she understood. Their greatest victory was not the end of fear, but everything they found, despite it. Epilogue. Avebury Hall, spring of 1829. A warm breeze drifted across the veranda of Avebury Hall as Emma leaned against the balustrade, watching Victoria race through the garden as though the entire world were an invitation. The girl, now 3 years old, had Damien's restless energy and a sweetness entirely her own. She chased butterflies with the resolve of a tiny commander, tripping, rising, persisting, always persisting. Emma smiled. Victoria had inherited no limitations, only freedom. Her hand moved to her rounded belly. 5 months along. A gentle flutter answered her touch, shy, tentative, alive. Joy came laced with a quiet thread of apprehension, not the old paralyzing shadow, but a natural caution shaped by experience. Her first child had transformed her. This second one made that transformation permanent. On the lawn below, Damien knelt beside Victoria, showing her something hidden among the flowers. Delighted, she began tucking petals into his hair. He let her, laughing with a lightness Emma still found astonishingly, miraculously his. 36 years old, he had already surpassed the age he once believed would be the end of him. And there he stood, living, laughing, crowned with blossoms by his daughter. Emma felt her eyes sting, not with fear but with quiet gratitude. Damien looked up, saw her at the veranda, and smiled. It was a private, familiar smile that said, "I'm here without a single word." Carrying Victoria, he climbed the steps toward her. "Mama!" the girl declared triumphantly. "I made Papa pretty!" Emma laughed, taking her into her arms. "Pretty doesn't begin to cover it. He looks perfect." Damien sighed with feigned resignation, though his smile betrayed him. His hand came to rest on Emma's belly with gentle reverence. "And you?" he asked softly. "How are you feeling?" "Good." She threaded her fingers through his. "Strong." Victoria wriggled free and dashed back into the garden, and Damien drew Emma close, holding her with the tenderness of someone who knew exactly what every small gesture meant. "Sometimes I still wake in the dark," he murmured. "For a moment, I feel that old fear again, as though something were calling me back." Emma lifted her face to his. "And then?" He breathed deeply, a simple act, yet one that carried years of internal struggle. "Then I hear you breathing. I think of Victoria." His hand brushed her belly. "I feel this little one, and I realize the fear has grown smaller, much smaller. It doesn't decide who I am anymore." A soft smile warmed Emma's lips. "That's all I want," she whispered. She held him tightly, feeling the steady, living beat of his heart against hers. Damien, who once counted birthdays as warnings, now measured time in moments he longed to keep. Later, when Emma went inside to rest, Damien lingered on the veranda watching her walk away. The way she carried herself, confident, serene, sure, brought him a peace he'd never known in his youth. Below, Victoria laughed as she chased her hat across the lawn, the wind playing along. Her laughter drifted up the path like a promise. And for the first time, Damien allowed himself to imagine the future without dread, not as a ledger of survival, but with the quiet curiosity of someone who had finally learned to live. Perhaps he would see Victoria grow. Perhaps he would cradle this new child. Perhaps the house would one day echo with the laughter of more children. Perhaps not. But the possibility no longer tormented him. He stepped into the library and found Emma leafing through a book. He sat beside her. She rested her head on his shoulder with easy familiarity. Outside, spring light poured over the gardens like liquid gold. Emma smiled, nuzzling his shoulder again. The baby stirred, as if to claim a place in that shared stillness, and Damien felt something deep settle inside him. Gratitude. For Emma, for Victoria, for the child growing within her, for every day he had already been granted, and for those yet to come. They remained like that, side by side, watching life unfold beyond the window. For the first time, neither felt urgency, or fear, or haste. Over time, Damien came to understand that the so-called Mandeville curse had never been an illness, a weak heart, or a pre-written fate. It had been a story, told and retold until it felt like truth. And he was the first man in his family to dare rewrite it. Life did not demand grand promises, nor guarantees no one could give. It asked only for presence, and Emma and Damien had chosen that, together day after day, not by denying fear, but by letting love grow stronger than it. In the end, they realized the true miracle wasn't escaping death. It was daring to live and to love in spite of it. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more tales to life.